The room didn't know yet. That was the thing. 300 people in the Seoul Grand Ballroom were still talking, still drinking, still performing the careful choreography of wealth and influence, and not one of them could feel what had just shifted in the atmosphere. The string quartet kept playing. The champagne kept moving on silver trays. The chandeliers kept their light over all of it, indifferent and bright. Kang Ji-hoon knew the moment he looked up. He was mid-sentence. Something about quarterly projections, something his business partner would remember saying, and he would not, because the moment his eyes crossed the room and found her standing in the doorway in a gold-wrapped dress with her braids pinned up and her chin level and her stomach unmistakably, undeniably round, the sentence stopped existing. She hadn't seen him yet. He had 3 seconds. 3 seconds to look at the woman he had walked away from 9 months ago. 3 seconds to absorb the full reality of what he was seeing. 3 seconds before her eyes moved across the room with the professional ease of a woman who had learned to scan any space and find her footing and landed on his face. She didn't flinch. That was what undid him. Not the pregnancy. Not the shock of her presence in a city he'd told himself she'd never return to. It was the composure. The absolute, devastating, deliberate composure of a woman who had clearly spent 9 months building something strong enough to stand in exactly this moment. She looked at him for 2 seconds. Then she looked away. And somehow the looking away, the clean, unhurried pivot of her attention to something across the room that wasn't him, cracked something open in Kang Ji-hoon's chest that 9 months of constructed distance had worked very hard to keep sealed. Beside him, Hoon Shin was still speaking. He heard none of it. Welcome to Afro Soul Connect. On today's episode, you get a dose of culture clash, forbidden love, family pressure, second chances, and an unforgettable reunion. If this is your first time here, make sure to like, subscribe, and click the notification icon so you never miss a new story when it drops. And don't forget to send this story to a friend or family member you think would love it. Also, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd really love to know. Now, let's dive back into this amazing story. To understand what that moment in the ballroom cost both of them, you have to go back 2 years. You have to go back to Paris. A rainy Thursday evening in the 7th arrondissement. A gallery called Lumiere that smelled like cedar and old money. A textile exhibition that had drawn the kind of crowd that dressed beautifully and said very little of substance. Kang Ji-hoon was not there for the art. He was there because a man named Du Bois, who owed 3 of his business partners a combined total of 11 million euros, had a habit of attending gallery openings on Thursday evenings to drink wine and feel cultured while avoiding his phone. Ji-hoon had come to remind him, quietly and in person, that avoidance had a shelf life. He found Du Bois in 20 minutes. He delivered the reminder in 4. He should have left immediately after. He didn't leave. Because on the way to the exit, he stopped in front of a piece that made no logical sense to stop in front of, a textile installation, 7 feet tall, woven in deep indigo and burnt orange and gold, with Yoruba Adinkra symbols embedded in the fabric in a way that made the whole thing feel less like art and more like a private conversation he wasn't invited to but couldn't walk away from. "You've been standing there for 6 minutes," said a voice beside him. He turned. And there she was. Zara Okafor, 28 years old, dark brown skin that absorbed the gallery's soft lighting and gave it back warmer. Eyes that held the kind of intelligence that doesn't perform itself for anyone. Wearing a forest green wrap dress and carrying a glass of wine she hadn't touched, watching him with an expression somewhere between amusement and genuine curiosity. "Is it that obvious?" he said. "Only to me," she said. "Because I made it. I know what it's supposed to do to people. You're the first person tonight who's actually let it." He looked at the piece again. "What is it supposed to do?" "Make you feel like someone is telling you the truth," she said simply. "Even if you're not ready to hear it." He looked back at her. "That's a complicated thing to want from fabric." She smiled, slow, unbothered, like she had all the time in the world. "Most complicated things look simple on the outside," she said. "That's what makes them dangerous." He stayed for 3 more hours. He left with her number and something burning quietly in his chest that he hadn't felt since before his father's health started failing. Something light and inconvenient and impossible to file away neatly in the part of his mind where he kept things that couldn't be acted on. He called her the next morning, which was not something Kang Ji-hoon did. She picked up on the fourth ring and said, "I was wondering if you would." And somehow the warmth of it, the absolute absence of performance, made him want to see her again more urgently than anything had made him want anything in recent memory. What followed was 2 years that he would spend the rest of his life trying to accurately describe and failing. Not because it was complicated, because it was the opposite. It was simple in ways his life had never been, and simplicity, for a man built entirely from complexity, was the most disorienting thing imaginable. She visited him in Seoul 3 times that first year. He flew to Lagos twice and to London once. On the flight back from London, somewhere over the Middle East at 4 a.m, he looked at her sleeping against the window in pale cabin light and felt something so certain and so frightening that he spent the next 4 hours working, so he wouldn't have to sit with it unguarded. "You're afraid of me," she said when he landed, like she'd somehow received the thought from 30,000 feet. "I'm not afraid of anything," he said. "Ji-hoon," she said, using the name only she used, the one that landed differently every time. "I didn't say it was a bad thing." She called him Ji-hoon. She cooked jollof rice in his Seoul penthouse kitchen at midnight and filled the space with Afro beats at a volume his security team found alarming. She argued in English and switched to Yoruba when she was making a point she wanted to land without interruption. She left her shea butter on his bathroom counter, and her laughter in the halls, and her particular brand of warmth in rooms that had only ever known strategy. She was the only soft thing in a life built entirely from hard decisions. "You protect everyone," she told him once, her head resting against his shoulder on the balcony at midnight, the city spread out below them like something spilled. "Who protects you?" He didn't answer. But the way he looked at her after that question changed, and they both felt it shift. He knew, even then, that something was coming. He could feel it the way you feel bad weather before it arrives, a pressure in the atmosphere, a specific quiet before noise. His father's health was declining in ways the family wasn't publicly acknowledging. The council was watching. The succession conversations were happening in rooms Ji-hoon was deliberately not entering yet. He told himself he had time. He didn't have time. The call came on a Tuesday. His father was gone. Ji-hoon sat in his office for 47 minutes after the call ended. Phone still in his hand. Not moving. Not speaking. Then he set the phone down, straightened his jacket, and walked into his next scheduled meeting. Because that was what the Kang family did. You absorbed the blow and kept moving, and whatever it cost you internally was a debt paid later, alone in the dark. Zara called him that evening. Her voice when he answered was immediate and soft in a way that required no instruction. "Ji-hoon," she said. Just his name. Just that. And he almost told her everything right then. About the succession clause. About Haun Shin. About the conversation his father's lawyer had already requested for the following morning. About the door he could already feel swinging shut. Instead he said, "I'm fine." "You're not," she said. "And that's okay. You don't have to be." "Zara." He stopped. Started again. "I'll call you tomorrow." He didn't call her tomorrow. He called her 6 days later, after the lawyer, after the council's first formal gathering, after Haun Shin's father sat across from him in a private room and laid out an alliance so carefully constructed that refusing it would have consequences across 3 generations of Kang holdings. She picked up on the second ring. Warm. Immediate. The way she always was. And the warmth nearly broke his resolve entirely. "I need to see you," he said. She flew to Seoul the next morning. He met her at the apartment in Mapogu, the smaller one, not the penthouse. She didn't know it was the one place in the city where he'd always felt like something other than the head of an empire. He'd chosen it deliberately. A small kindness he couldn't help giving even now. She knew before he said anything. He saw it the moment she walked through the door. The way her eyes moved over him and found something missing. Something closed that had been open. "Say it," she said quietly. Not a plea. A command. "I can't do this anymore," he said. The silence that followed was the longest of his life. "Can't," she said finally. "Or won't." He said nothing. And his silence was its own answer. The one he knew she would understand and hate simultaneously. "Is there someone else?" she asked. "There will be," he said, because he owed her that much truth. Even if he couldn't give her the rest of it. Even if the full picture, the claws, the counsel, the impossible machine he'd been born into, would have made her fight, and fighting meant hope, and hope was the cruelest thing he could have left her with. She looked at him for a very long time. He held her gaze. Looking away would have been the final cowardice. "I called you Ji-hoon," she said at last. Very quiet. "For 2 years I called you that. Do you know how many people in this world call you that?" He said nothing. "Just me," she said. "Only me." She left without crying. He stood at the window and watched the car pull away and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that he had just done the most permanent thing he had ever done. He had his assistant disconnect her number before he could change his mind. What he didn't know, what existed in the space between what he'd chosen and what he'd lost, was that Zara Okafor already carried something of his that no disconnected number could reach. She didn't know it yet either. She spent the first month back in Lagos in her mother's house, in the particular quiet of a woman who has decided not to fall apart publicly. She worked. She sketched. She woke at 4 in the morning with a weight on her chest that had no name except the obvious one, and she breathed through it and made tea and sat with it until it became bearable. The pregnancy revealed itself 9 weeks after Ji-hoon closed that door. She sat in her Lagos bathroom with the test in her hand for a long time. Then she called her mother and said nothing for several seconds, and her mother, who had always been able to read the specific frequency of her daughter's silences, said, "Is it his?" "Yes," Zara said. "Then you go back," her mother said. "You tell him." "No," Zara said. Simply. Finally. "I don't." The conversation lasted 2 hours and resolved nothing, because Zara had already made her decision before she picked up the phone, and once she decided something, it calcified into something immovable. She would raise this child. She would not use a pregnancy to reclaim a man who had chosen to leave. She would not walk back through a door someone had deliberately closed. She told herself this so many times over the following months that she almost believed every word of it. Then the email arrived from On Fashion House in Seoul, one of Korea's most prestigious luxury textile brands, offering her the largest international commission of her career. A collaboration that would put her work in front of an audience she'd spent a decade trying to reach. A launch event. A 6-month residency. A contract that represented everything she'd been building toward. She was 6 months pregnant. She was exhausted. She was still not entirely over a man she refused to admit she wasn't over. She accepted the commission. Because Zara Okafor had never once let a man, not even the right one, determine the shape of her ambition. She would go to Seoul. She would do her work. She would keep her head down. She would not go looking for him. Seoul was a big city. Ji-hoon ran in entirely different circles. The probability of crossing paths was minimal. She had miscalculated. The On Fashion House launch gala was held at the Seoul Grand Ballroom on a Friday evening in October, and Zara arrived 20 minutes late because her feet had decided that the heels she'd planned to wear were no longer a reasonable proposition. She'd switched to flat gold sandals at the last minute, adjusted her wrap dress, checked her reflection once, and decided that 6 months pregnant and self-possessed was its own kind of entrance. She didn't need the extra height. She walked through the ballroom doors, scanned the room the way she always did at events, identifying the client, the photographer, the nearest exit, and then her eyes found Kang Ji-hoon, and every system in her body went simultaneously quiet. He was across the room, black suit, standing beside a woman in an ivory gown who was beautiful in the precise, polished way of someone groomed for exactly this kind of room. He was holding a champagne glass. He was in the middle of a conversation. He hadn't seen her yet. She had 3 seconds. She used them to straighten her spine, release a slow breath, and arrange her face into something that communicated exactly nothing of what was detonating behind it. She had told herself, on the plane, in the car, in the elevator up to this ballroom, that returning to Seoul carried a risk. She had told herself she had prepared for it. She had not prepared for this. Then he looked up. What moved across his face in that first unguarded second was not what she had expected. She had expected guilt. She had expected the smooth performance of a man who had fully moved on. She had expected the particular cruelty of indifference. Instead, for one single second before he caught it and sealed it away, what she saw on the face of Kang Ji-hoon looked devastatingly close to devastation. Then the mask came down.
Smooth. Practiced.
Impenetrable. She looked away first. She found her client. She crossed the room. She assembled her smile piece by piece as she walked, and she did not look back. She felt his eyes on her for the rest of the evening like something physical. She didn't turn toward it once. Hoon-shin noticed at the 40-minute mark. She was perceptive in the specific way of women raised in rooms where reading people is a survival skill. She noticed the slight tension in Ji-hoon's jaw. She noticed the way his gaze moved to the same side of the room at intervals too regular to be accidental. She followed the line of it and found a Nigerian woman in a gold-wrapped dress, visibly pregnant, luminously beautiful, speaking with the on-director with a warmth and ease that made the room naturally lean toward her. "Who is she?"
Hoon asked.
"A designer," Ji-hoon said. "International commission." "I don't know her personally." He said it so smoothly it should have worked. Hoon held the information for 1 second longer than necessary, looked back at Zara, then picked up her champagne and said nothing. But the quality of her silence shifted. And Ji-hoon, who had spent 3 months learning the specific registers of Hoon's composure, felt the change. Zara found the bathroom at the 90-minute mark. She stood at the sink with cold water on her wrists and had a firm, private conversation with herself about professionalism, about the fact that she had flown 11 hours and was 6 months pregnant and was not going to let the sight of a specific Korean man in a specific black suit dismantle 9 months of internal architecture she had constructed specifically to keep herself upright. She was mid-conversation with herself when the door opened and Ji-hoon walked in. She turned from the mirror. He stopped in the doorway. Neither of them spoke, and the silence between them had actual weight. "This is the women's bathroom," she said. "I know," he said. "Then you should leave." He didn't leave. "Zara," he said. And the sound of her name in his mouth after 9 months of nothing hit her somewhere she hadn't fully reinforced. "Don't," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not, but he couldn't see her hands. "How long have you known?" he asked. His eyes moved briefly to her stomach, then back to her face. "Long enough," she said. "Why didn't you?" "You disconnected your number, Ji-hoon." The words came out quiet and precise with the particular sharpness of something that had been waiting a long time for the right moment. "You disconnected your number and walked away and made it very clear there was nothing left to call about." He closed his eyes. Just briefly. Just long enough for something to move across his face that she refused to let herself interpret. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't," she said. "I'm not here because of that. I'm here because of my work. I need you to respect that, and let me do it." "Zara, is your fiancé outside that door?" she asked. The word landed between them like something dropped from a height. He didn't answer fast enough. "Okay," she said. She picked up her clutch. "Then we're done here." She walked past him. He reached for her arm, not grabbing, just the briefest touch, barely a second, and she stopped. Not because of the touch.
Because of what he said next.
"It's mine," he said. "Isn't it?" Not a question. Not quite. She turned to look at him over her shoulder, and the expression on her face was the one she wore when she was deciding how much honesty the person in front of her had earned. "Good night, Ji-hoon," she said. She walked out. He stood in that bathroom for 3 full minutes before he trusted himself to follow her back into the ballroom and perform the rest of the evening like a man whose entire internal foundation hadn't just shifted beneath him. Before the story takes its next turn, drop a comment right now and tell me honestly, should Zara have told Ji-hoon about the baby from the beginning? Or did he lose that right the moment he closed that door? I need your thoughts before everything changes in the next part.
He didn't sleep.
He lay in the dark of the penthouse and stared at the ceiling and did something he hadn't permitted himself in 9 months. He thought about her without management. Not in the careful, contained way he'd occasionally allowed, keeping her at a precise emotional distance so the thinking didn't become unbearable. He thought about her fully, without the armor. The way she laughed, Not the polite version she offered rooms that hadn't earned the real one, but the full laugh, the one that took up space and made no apology for it. The way she listened with a specific quality of attention that made you feel genuinely understood rather than simply heard. The way she said his name. 2 syllables that somehow contained every version of himself he'd ever been willing to show another person. The way she'd looked at him in that bathroom. Not with heartbreak. Not with the desperate, reaching kind of pain that would have been easier to walk away from. With composure. With a settled, beautiful certainty that told him she had already survived him. Already rebuilt. Already moved forward. While carrying his child. He sat up at 4 a.m. and called Park, his head of intelligence, a man who had worked for the Kang family for 16 years and had learned that calls at this hour meant the architecture of his employer's life was rearranging itself. Find out where she's staying, Ji-hoon said. Quietly. Nobody else. Not Ha-eun, not her people, not the council. Yes, sir, Park said, without inflection. And if she asks how we found her? Ji-hoon thought about Zara in the bathroom. The precision of her composure. The deliberate restraint of a woman who had decided exactly how much of herself to protect, and was protecting it completely.
She won't ask, he said.
She'll already know. Park found her address in 40 minutes. A service department near Gangnam, close to the On studio. Comfortable, practical, nothing excessive. He recognized her in the details immediately. She spent money on things that mattered, and nothing on things that didn't. He didn't go to her that morning. He wanted to. The want was physical, actual, the kind of pull you feel in the chest before logic arrives. But he'd spent 2 years learning Zara Okafor well enough to know that showing up unannounced at dawn was not the approach she would receive. She needed to feel like the choice was hers. She needed the power in the room. He could give her that. He had given her very little else. He sent flowers instead. No note. Just bird of paradise and protea, the specific arrangement he'd once watched her stop in front of at a Lagos market and touch the petals of with the quiet reverence she reserved for beautiful things. He'd remembered it the way he remembered everything about her, filed in the part of his mind he'd spent 9 months telling himself was permanently sealed. She called him 2 hours later. He picked up before the first ring ended. How do you even remember that? She said. Her voice was careful, neutral, but underneath it was something fractured, something that hadn't been in the bathroom, something that told him the flowers had done exactly what he intended, which was to prove that the man who walked away had not, despite every performance to the contrary, forgotten a single detail. I remember everything, he said quietly. A pause. Then, Ji-hoon, what do you want? To talk, he said. Properly. Not in a bathroom. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere you can leave whenever you want, and I can't follow without your permission. Another pause. Longer. I'm busy until Thursday, she said. Thursday, he said immediately. I'm choosing the place, she said. I know, he said. I expected that. He heard her exhale, something between exasperation and a softness she hadn't meant to release. You're impossible, she said. You told me that regularly for 2 years, he said. I've missed hearing it. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. It was the kind that means something is shifting, even if neither person is ready to name it.
Thursday, she said.
And she hung up. He sat holding the phone and felt, for the first time in 9 months, something that lived dangerously close to hope. Which was terrifying. Because hope was the exact thing he denied her when he left, and feeling it now made him acutely aware of the size of what he owed. What he didn't know yet, what was moving through the story's background like a current under still water, was that Park had not been as quiet as instructed. Ha-eun Shin had her own intelligence. She was a senator's daughter, raised in rooms where information was the primary currency, and she had spent 26 years learning to read landscapes that most people only ever stood in. She knew about the flowers before lunchtime. She knew about the phone call before evening. And by Wednesday night, sitting across from her father in the Hanamdong residence, she knew things about Ji-hoon and Zara's history that Ji-hoon believed were known only to him. You knew, Ha-eun said to her father. Flat. Declarative. Senator Shin set down his tea carefully. I knew he had an attachment. I knew it needed to end before the succession could proceed. The child complicates things, her father said. But it doesn't end them. The clause requires a Korean wife. A child born outside that arrangement doesn't invalidate the alliance. Hoon looked at her father for a long moment. And what moved across her face was not what he expected from a daughter who'd been raised to absorb obligation as identity and strategic calculation as instinct. It looked, unexpectedly and unmistakably, like anger. You're talking about a child, she said. I'm talking about an empire, he said. They're not mutually exclusive, she said quietly. And she picked up her phone and did something her father did not see coming. She texted Ji-hoon. For words. We need to talk. Ji-hoon read it at 11 that night, in his study, surrounded by papers he hadn't been reading. He stared at it for a moment, then typed, tomorrow morning. He put the phone down and sat in the quiet of his office, feeling the weight of everything converging, the council, the clause, the alliance, the succession, all of it pressing from every side. And underneath all of it, cutting through the noise like a frequency too strong to ignore, the image of Zara turning away from him in a ballroom, chin level, composed, choosing to be fine without him. He picked the phone back up. He didn't respond further to Hoon. He texted Park instead. Move Thursday to tomorrow. Same terms. Her choice of place. Zara responded 11 minutes later. A coffee shop in Insadong. 10 o'clock. Then a second message arrived 30 seconds after the first. It said, I'm not coming back to you, Ji-hoon. I want you to understand that before tomorrow. This conversation is about the baby, not about us. He read it 3 times. Then he typed back one line. I know, he said.
Come anyway.
The coffee shop in Insadong was the kind of place that existed outside the city's velocity. Small, warm, wooden tables worn soft by years of use, the smell of roasted barley tea, and something sweet drifting from the kitchen. Zara was already there when he arrived, seated at the window with both hands wrapped around a cup, wearing a rust-colored dress, her braids pinned up, looking out at the street with the expression of a woman who had spent the morning in a serious internal negotiation. He sat down across from her, without preamble. She looked at him. He looked at her. Seoul moved outside the window behind her, and neither of them spoke. You look tired, she said finally. I haven't slept, he said. That's your own fault, she said. But her voice was softer than the words. That had always been the particular paradox of Zara Okafor. She said hard things gently, and the gentleness made them land harder. He ordered tea he didn't want, and then put both hands flat on the table and looked at her directly. I made a mistake, he said. She opened her mouth. Let me finish, he said quietly. Please. She waited. I made a mistake, he said again. Not just in leaving. In how I left. I chose your pain over your truth. I told myself I was protecting you by not explaining the succession clause, the council, the machine I was born into. I told myself that if I gave you the full picture you'd fight for us, and I didn't trust myself to say no to you twice. That was cowardice dressed as mercy. I know that. I knew it then. He looked at her hands around the cup. He didn't reach for them. I disconnected your number because I was afraid that hearing your voice one more time would make me come back and burn everything down to do it. And then you'd be living inside a war I started, and that felt worse than losing you cleanly. It probably wasn't my decision to make. She was very still. You were pregnant, he said. You didn't tell me. I understand why. I left you no door open. That is on me. Ji-hoon. I'm not finished, he said. Each word quiet, precise, certain. I have spent 9 months building a life that looks correct from every angle that matters to every person who monitors it. The council, the alliance, the succession. I have been the most technically proficient I've ever been, and I have been completely hollow inside. Because the version of me that felt like something real only ever existed in one specific context. He looked at her. And that context was you. The silence that settled between them then was the softest one they'd shared in 9 months. Zara set her cup down slowly. She looked at the table. Then she looked up at him, and the composure she'd been holding all morning shifted, not breaking, but becoming something more honest than protection. I was going to do it alone, she said. I'd decided. I'd made peace with it. I'm not saying that for sympathy. I'm saying it so you understand that I wasn't sitting somewhere waiting to be found. I came to Seoul for my work. I am here for my career. I know, he said. And I meant what I said in the text, she said. This conversation is about the baby. It's not about, she stopped. It's not about us. Zara, he said gently. You flew to Seoul 6 months pregnant and accepted a commission that put you in the same city as me. You're sitting across from me right now when you could have sent a lawyer. She held his gaze. Maybe I wanted to see, she said quietly, if it was still there. Is it? He asked. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he felt every second of it pressing against his chest. Yes, she said, like it cost her something real to admit it. Unfortunately, he reached across the table then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull her hands away. She didn't move them. He covered them with his, and she looked down at the contact, then back at him, and her expression was the most unguarded it had been since she walked into that ballroom. I'm not Hoon, she said. I'm not built for the kind of life you're supposed to be building right now. I know, he said, which is why that life was always wrong. Your counsel. The council answers to the head of the Kang family, he said. I am the head of the Kang family. I spent 9 months forgetting that those two things are supposed to be the same person. She stared at him. Ji-hoon, if you're about to tell me you're choosing this. I already chose, he said simply. Last night at 4 a.m, when the only thing my mind would produce clearly was your face. I'd chosen before that. The only thing left was the conversation. What he hadn't told her yet, what he would tell her in the next hour, slowly, because it changed the entire shape of the story, was that Hoon Shin had called him that morning at 7. He'd answered expecting strategy, expecting the careful language of a woman protecting an alliance her father had spent years constructing. Instead, Hoon had said something that rewrote his understanding of the last 3 months entirely. I don't want a husband who is in love with someone else, she said, flat and certain. I'm building a life, not a performance. End the arrangement. I'll handle my father. He'd been silent. Ji-hoon, Hoon said. You're Nigerian designer. I saw her work in the gallery wing before the event last night. The on-commission is extraordinary. You should tell her that. A pause, precise and deliberate. Take care of your child. That's a clause no council can override. She hung up before he could respond. Here was the truth about Hoon Shin that nobody in the room had known. She had never wanted the marriage. She had accepted it the way she had accepted every obligation her father constructed around her life, as a structure to inhabit rather than a life to live. But sitting across from Senator Shin the night before, watching him discuss Zara's child as a complication to be managed rather than a person to be considered, something in Hoon had made a quiet, permanent decision. She was done being the structure other people built their ambitions inside. She made 3 phone calls the next morning. 1 to Ji-hoon, 1 to her father, which had not gone smoothly, and 1 to her own lawyer. By the time Ji-hoon sat across from Zara in that Insadong coffee shop, the engagement announcement Senator Shin had planned to release by Friday morning had been quietly and permanently removed from the calendar. Ji-hoon told Zara all of this over the next 2 hours, slowly, over tea and a pastry she ate half of because she was hungry and had stopped pretending otherwise. He told her about the succession clause, the council, his father's death and the machine it set into motion, the alliance he'd been born into, and the specific cost of every gear inside it. He gave her the full truth he denied her 9 months earlier. And she listened the way she always listened, completely without interruption, with the quality of attention that made people feel genuinely understood. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. You should have told me, she said. Yes, he said. No qualification. I would have fought for us, she said. I know, he said. I was afraid of how much. She looked at him steadily. I'm still afraid of what this life looks like, what it costs, what it means for a child growing up inside, all of it. So am I, he said. Every single day. But I'm more afraid of the version where I let you walk out of Seoul again without saying what's true. She looked down at her cup, then back at him. Call me Zara, she said. Not Ms. Okafor. Not your designer. Not the mother of your child. Just Zara. Like you used to. Zara, he said. The way it came out, quiet, certain, like a door opening instead of closing, made her close her eyes briefly. "Okay," she said when she opened them. "Okay." He didn't rush it after that. He walked with her through Insadong in the October afternoon, through the narrow streets and paper shops and small galleries with their doors open, and he didn't reach for her hand until she reached for his first. When she did, he held it carefully. The way you hold something once you finally understand its value and have no intention of setting it down again. She leaned against him slightly at a street corner while they waited for the light to change, just enough for him to feel the warmth of her beside him, and he looked down at her and thought that this was what he'd spent 9 months building armor against. This exact gravity, this specific feeling, and that every piece of that armor had been worth absolutely nothing.
"Ji-hoon," she said.
"Yeah," he said. "The baby kicks at night," she said. "Really hard. Like, he already has opinions about everything." Ji-hoon said. She smiled, slow, warm, unbothered in the way that had always been entirely hers. "I have a feeling," she said. "I'm usually right." "You're always right," he said. "It's one of the more exhausting things about you." She laughed. The real laugh. The full one that took up space and made no apology for doing so. And the sound of it in the October air of Seoul felt like the most important thing he had heard all year. The council met 3 weeks later. Ji-hoon sat at the head of the table and delivered a statement that was precise, unambiguous, and final. The succession clause required a wife. He intended to be married. The timeline would be his own, and the candidate would be his choice, and any council member who found those terms unacceptable was welcome to present that position in writing and receive a response through his lawyers. No one presented it in writing. Senator Shin made noise for approximately 3 weeks before Hoon, in a move that surprised even her father, gave an interview to a respected Seoul business publication in which she spoke with elegant vagueness about modern women and the architecture of personal choice. The subtext was unmistakable to everyone who read it. The noise from the senator's office stopped shortly after. 6 weeks after the coffee shop in Insadong, Zara went into labor at a private hospital in Seoul at 11:17 in the evening, with Ji-hoon's hand in hers and his voice low and steady at her ear, completely and unreservedly present in a way that left no room for performance or distance or any of the things he'd spent 9 months hiding behind. Their son arrived at 1:42 in the morning. Ji-hoon held him for the first time with the expression of a man who has managed very difficult rooms and made very difficult decisions, and is currently being completely and helplessly undone by 7 pounds of brand new person. Zara watched him from the hospital bed with her hands folded and a warmth on her face, so complete that the nurse quietly slipped out to give them the moment. "Ji-hoon," Zara said softly. He looked up from the baby. "You're crying," she said. "I'm not," he said, which was not true. She smiled. "Didn't push it. Let him have the pretense because after everything, after all the distance and the armor and the months of careful, practiced hollowness, she understood exactly what tenderness cost him. And she chose to protect it rather than expose it. That was the thing about Zara Okafor. It had always been the thing. She had seen him clearly, the whole of him, the difficult parts, the closed parts, the parts that expressed themselves through control because openness had never been made safe for him, and she had chosen to love what she saw anyway.
That hadn't changed.
It wouldn't. Some love stories don't arrive cleanly. Some come through loss and distance, and the specific wreckage of decisions made too quickly in rooms that demanded certainty before certainty was possible. The ones that survive all of that, the ones that walk back through a ballroom door 6 months pregnant and composed and still carrying the other person's name in the softest, most protected part of themselves, those are the ones that were real from the very beginning. Kang Ji-hoon chose power his entire life and called it responsibility. It took a woman who was never once afraid of him to show him the difference between protecting what you love and protecting yourself from the cost of loving it. So tell me, do you think Ji-hoon deserved a second chance after the way he left, or did Zara give too much too soon? What do you think about Hoon? Did she do the right thing for herself, or did she simply read which way the wind was blowing? And if you were Zara, 6 months pregnant, standing in that ballroom, would you have walked away for good or done exactly what she did? If this story moved something in you, hit subscribe, and never miss the next episode of Afro Soul Connect. Drop a like, leave your city in the comments, and send this to someone who needs a good love story today. We will see you in the next one.